Hello friends, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about addiction to life. But this could just as well be applied to addiction to substances or behavioural patterns. So I hope it's useful. Recently I've discussed all of the aspects of the Buddha's teaching from the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the practice coming from this Noble Eightfold Path of Sila, moral virtue, Samadhi, meditation, and Panya, wisdom. And through wisdom we develop the understanding of the faculties of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, or characteristics of existence, of life, which are impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and not self or out of our control, anatta. And that was the main point of discussion for the most recent video, although I think I subsequently followed up to talk about what it is that we consider to be our self, that is, what it is made up from, and that is the five khandhas. So naturally these topics progress onto a little bit of a more detailed analysis, but nothing too complicated, albeit it can provoke considerable amount of intellectual debate when one discusses the 12 links of dependent origination. So what are the 12 links of dependent origination? Well, I'm comparing this talk today, the 12 links of dependent origination, to the 12-step program. Excuse me, I have some notes to remind me today because I'm going to be using some Pali words. Not to show off, because I certainly cannot do that. I don't know some of them, which is why I have some notes to help me out. But they are common. The Pali is the common language used in Theravada Buddhism, so that when we have slightly different interpretations of the translations of those original words as taught by the Buddha, we all can fall back to some common ground. And this is important because the Buddha taught very simply how things are. And all we have to see is that, just that, the truth. But there's this tendency to overthink, overanalyze each and every statement, or each and every word even. So the simple translation of dukkha, which we translate as suffering or unsatisfactoriness, can take all sorts of forms when translated into different phrases, or then different explanations in different languages, and that is one of the more simple terms that is used. So I'll refer back to these words where it naturally feels good to do so, but we'll be offering you my English translations as I understand these words to mean. But they are by no means definitive. The actual words are the Pali. So that is my little caveat, if you like. So if I interpret avijja as ignorance, that is how I interpret it from what I have read, what I've learned, and what I've come to understand. But there is no argument in the word avijja itself. So you can take that and translate it into your own language, or a variation on how I do. So putting that little diversion aside, let's get on. I'm comparing the Buddhist alternative to the 12-step program. Why? Well, it isn't really, although the only real common thing it has, or the thing it has in common, is the number 12, and that both lists, or both ideas behind those lists, their aims, their goals are to eradicate addiction. In the 12-step program, it is the addiction to substances that we have picked up in this lifetime, or behavioural patterns. So it could be alcohol, drugs, or behavioural pattern could be gambling, for instance. And it is a proven and effective means to reduce the cravings or the need for those to satisfy those tendencies. How successful it is, I'm not sure. That isn't my experience of life. I chose a different path in terms of giving up life in the ordinary sense of a hedonistic lifestyle of enjoyment and parties and this and that and all of those things, towards a more spiritual existence, looking inwardly for contentment and true happiness. And that I found in the teachings of the Buddha, what we call Buddhism. So for non-Buddhists, this is just as interesting and as applicable, because Buddhism is a way to deal with all of the things that we come across in our day-to-day lives. And of course, in many countries, it is a religion, their religion. But it requires not so much belief or worship, but more an approach and an understanding and a frequent recollection of the teachings. And one way this is done by Buddhist monks and lay people in Buddhist countries is through chanting. And interestingly enough, I mean, there's a very regularly chanted chant in Thai Buddhist temples, where I am here in Thailand, that is exactly this 12 links of dependent origination, called the, here we go, it has to look, Paticca Samuppada, coming from the Paticca Samuppada Sutta, which was going back to the early teachings of the Buddha. So these are the original words of the Buddha. This isn't some list that's come. There are many commentaries and lists on the 12 links of dependent origination that have come later, but this is really taking it back to the original. And in that chant, we quote these 12 links, albeit in reverse order, but that is neither here nor there. That just really shows that it actually goes in a circle. Like a lot of these lists, they're all interrelated. They all include components and ingredients or aspects of other lists. And very often, where they start at the beginning is a continuation from the end. So really, like one moment to another moment, or one life to another life. It's a continual process. And this is represented beautifully in these lists also. And this list I'm going to go through now, is particularly interesting because it really does show us how to make a shift. Now, when I say shift, I mean completely alter your perspective on life. So what you think is beyond your control, and this is where we might have some controversy, because in the 12-step program, I very much understand it to be that you relinquish everything to a higher power, and almost relinquishing responsibility at the first level to say that you are powerless over what this addictive substance has over you, the hold it has over you. Now, in this Buddhist alternative, the 12 links of dependent origination, you're not putting any hope, faith, or dependence on a higher power, and you are actually taking full responsibility for your addiction. You're going to see your addiction for what it is, how craving arises, and you're going to make a shift, an alteration, an adjustment only slight, that's why I say shift, in perception, in your mind, to stop that addiction. And this can be just as well applied to a substance, a behavioural pattern, or, if you want to take it into the deeper aspects of Buddhist cosmology, into rebirth, going into the next life. So let's begin with the list firstly, and I'll pick up each point maybe as we go through. I'm going to put this somewhere where I don't have to keep turning round. So, paticca samuppada. Paticca samuppada. Dependent origination. Okay. So it begins with, or ends with, avijja is the Pali word, avijja, which my translation is ignorance. So if one does not understand or has never heard the teachings of the Buddha, so is not familiar with the Four Noble Truths, that there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering, then we call that ignorance, or avijja. Ignorance is a harsh word. I mean, it doesn't mean that people whom have not heard of the Buddha's teachings are ignorant, because that sounds like a rather derogatory term. And there's an example of translation. But if I use something lighter, so you then have to start making it two words into a sentence, into a phrase. You're just trying to be polite. So we could just say avijja, and that's polite enough. But we need to have a basis of understanding behind the Pali word. So for the sake of argument, I'm using ignorance because it gets the point across. But not general ignorance. You could be extremely informed and intelligent, but ignorant of this particular fact, that there is suffering, a cause of suffering, an end of suffering, and a path leading to the end of suffering. So I hope that explains that politely. Next comes, so of course with this not knowing, this is where this list begins, with this not knowing of those things, the other, this leads to, and each of these links, this is why it's links of a chain. Yes, so each link links to the next, forming this circle. It's often depicted in Buddhist, what do you call this, drawings, iconography, as a wheel of 12 spokes, as opposed to the wheel of 8 spokes one might see in the representing the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Noble Eightfold Path. You have this wheel of 12 spokes representing this. This is how ancient these teachings are, going right back to the Buddha's time, 2,566 years ago, long before Bill's time of the AA and his 12-step program, a long time before that, 2,000 years before that and more. And really other religions haven't really tackled this aspect of addiction in its direct approach. Now, of course, this is really talking about the addiction of life, to life, and often associated with rebirth, which is also what tends to put people off it a little bit. But when you look into it from the point of view of addiction to substances, behavioural patterns, as opposed to just being reborn and trying to end this process of being reborn into samsara, that's what we call this cycle of rebirth into new life over and over again, to grow old, get sick and die, grow old, get sick and die, repeat, repeat, and there's some expression, isn't there, about that, Groundhog Day or whatever. Before we get into that, we look at these steps to break that pattern. But also breaking that pattern can be applied within this lifetime. So it's very appropriate to brush the dust off these teachings, bring it out into the open, and look at it, how useful it is from day to day. And it doesn't have to be serious addictions. It just can be a tendency you might have to waste a little time when you could be doing something more constructively. For instance, what we're trying to do in this practice is develop wholesome mind states and reduce unwholesome mind states through keeping sila, moral virtue, and practicing meditation. But often people ask, well, it's very difficult to do that, or it's very tricky to find the time to meditate, and therefore how am I ever going to develop any of this these aspects of wholesome mind states and reduce my unwholesome mind states? Well, you follow these, not steps, you follow the steps of the Noble Eightfold Path. But if you can develop an understanding of these links of dependent origination, then this will really help you. You don't need to write down these words, you don't need to learn these words. It isn't necessary, because it'll all become apparent in the end, whatever, because it forms a whole. The holistic view of this understanding is that there are karmic actions of body, speech and mind, and then which is karma, in the Pali Kamma, and then there is what is called vipaka, karma vipaka, and vipaka is V-I, here we go, you just check the spelling this time, then I don't have to apologise in the next video for my misspelling. V-I-P-A with a little line on the top, meaning R-K-A, vipaka, which is the results of our karmic actions. Now, we won't get into the direct and indirect results, because that can get very complex, and even the Buddha said that is a subject to be avoided, a question not to be dwelled on, and really not to be asked, because we cannot know precisely the results of all of our actions or predict them, but we can know if we do good, probably good things will happen. If we do bad, probably bad things will happen. So these karmic actions, this understanding, is in these steps. So, for instance, avijja, ignorance, comes under vipaka. It is a result of karmic actions in the past. It'll become clear, I hope. So the next, what links from avijja to next, is sankhara. Now, if you've heard of anything to do with Buddhism previously, you will know this word. And the Pali word sankhara I'm translating as mental formations. Basically, that is anything and everything we see and we experience is sankhara. Our mental formations with this thinking brain say, over there is a light on. This is sankhara. It's a light because I know from experience it's a light, and it's on because it's shining brightly so that you can see me. This is a mental formation. This is sankhara. This floor, sankhara. This bowl is sankhara. I am sankhara. It's all mental formations. Nothing is actually real other than that we know through sankhara, these mental formations. And you can see how this list also works in reverse, because that doesn't really lead directly. It more or less comes from the next that it leads into, which is vijnana, and that is consciousness. Now, in the last video I talked about the 5 khandhas, and I'll briefly go through those again in a minute, because we've got vijnana here, consciousness, which is not the same as citta, which I say citta is our conscious awareness, that which knows, or puru in the Thai, just to make it even, throw in another version, but easily referred to as citta, because there are so many ideas behind that. It is not the soul, it is not part of your personality, it isn't formed out of conditioned things, It is just that which knows. It's independent of the five khandhas. And one of the five khandhas is consciousness, vijnana. But consciousness is our thinking mind, our thinking brain. We'll call our brain for now. Our brain knowing the light's on and knowing that that's why it's light in here and not dark, and consciousness. When we're unconscious, this consciousness is not aware of its unconsciousness until it regains consciousness. It may be aware it was unconscious for some time, but it will not know how long it was unconscious for. For instance, it would need to go to some conditionality, time, to establish the length it was unconscious for. Whereas the citta, as explained in the previous video, just knows of unconsciousness when you're in touch with it. And vijnana, consciousness, links next to nama rupa in the Pali, which is kind of two words. Nama meaning mind, rupa meaning body. And what is that translating to? I've got here body and mind. So I often refer to this physical body and this thinking mind, or this brain. And nama rupa is just that. That's all, just that. But what is just that? Now, just that is the five khandhas. Let me remind you. Rupa, as in nama rupa. Rupa just means form. So you can't see it, but up there is a Buddha rupa, we call it. We don't call it a statue, because it's the form we use to represent the Buddha. Probably doesn't look anything like the Buddha at his time, but it's the commonly known form we bow to, not to worship, not to pray, but to remind ourselves through a physical action. This is a good way to teach ourselves in terms of reflection of the teacher and his teachings. We all have in Buddhism one common teacher, the Buddha, and then through lineages of millennia, many hundreds of years, 2600 years, monks and teachers whom have come from that time, passing on these teachings, and through the scriptures to this day. And we have in this current day a teacher at hand who can help us with understanding little points like this and day-to-day activities in our lives that Buddhism can help with. So this is form. Vedana, which is the next of the five khandhas, which is sensation. We have various feelings, if you like, that come into the body through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. But I'm not going to go too much into that because that comes along in the 12 links shortly. Sanya, which is perception. Then Sankhara comes along again, mental formation, and then Vijnana. So Sankhara and Vijnana are in the five aggregates. It's Sankhara and Vijnana are components of what make us, or what we perceive to be us, and often refer to as ourselves or our personalities. And anatta is the word we use after Nietzsche, dukkha, anatta, not self. That we are not that self, we are not that nama rupa, that is purely a result of causes and conditions that surround us as a result of our actions, our karma of body, speech and mind, which we are responsible for, but this produces the causes and conditions to produce what is these five khandhas we consider to be ourselves. The citta knows that, knows us, these selves, as that, the five khandhas, but is not of them and isn't caused by those conditions. Therefore, it is a little separate. Now, this is one way when one really develops that understanding of that citta through the practice of meditation and deep samadhi, that one can make that shift, that break in habitual patterns. Not on an intellectual level, not by learning this list. This is why I say you don't really need to go too much into stressing about learning these lists. I mean, clearly I haven't. I'm having to glance down at my notes. But if I tried, I probably could. But just know the principle behind the list, the objective, the aim. It's really two things. It's karma and vipaka. It's actions of body, speech and mind have results. And if the actions of body, speech and mind are as a result of sila, moral virtue, good results, yes? So this is all we need to know. And the precepts, the very simple rules of Buddhism, actually point us in the right direction, away from addiction. Now, of course, sometimes it's easier said than done, but when we go through these steps, you'll see how it all works. So I'll try and move a little bit more quickly, because it goes then in its circle and comes together quite beautifully. So, after Nama Rupa, which is the candles, the khandhas, Nama Rupa, the khandhas, we have really what is largely our perception of the causes and conditions, and that is the 6 sense bases, the 6 senses. In the Pali, Salayatana. Not sure I'm pronouncing that one correctly, Salayatana. But the 6 sense bases are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And number 6 is thinking, our thoughts from this thinking mind, this thinking brain. Moving on quickly, the next is contact. Don't know how to pronounce this very well, either passa or phassa in the Pali. Contact being our mind's contact that with these sense bases. So our mind's perception of, in the case of seeing, light, hearing, sound, smelling, odour, tasting, flavour, touch, feeling, heat or cold, hard or soft, comfortable or uncomfortable, and thoughts, thinking. And we have very little ability to shut off thinking. In fact, you shouldn't try. If you just stop and observe thinking, it will naturally provide little breaks for you to observe gaps in thinking. And the more you do that in your practice, the larger those gaps, the more evident they become. But our thinking goes on. We cannot determine our next thought. We do not know what we will think next. It just happens. So this is by far one of the most powerful of the 6 sense basis, 6 senses, and contact with that is how we react, how we behave, and what we do next. So say we see something we like, this is contact, and it will mean a thought will arise. So moving from that contact, passa, phassa, contact, onto the next is Vedana. If you remember, Vedana comes into the 5 khandhas. So you see how these lists interrelate. And Vedana is feeling or sensation. So you've got ears, you've got eyes and ears and a nose. You've got a mouth, you've got skin, so you can see, hear, smell, taste and touch. And you've got a brain that thinks. And as a result of that, you see things, smell things, taste things, touch things, and think about them. And what happens? You feel something. Now, you either feel positively or negatively about something. You like it or you dislike it, or neutral. No real feelings either way. But more often than not, we want something or we don't want something. This is Vedana. This is feelings in that sense. This is sensation. And this brings about what is next. And this is the link of the chain where we need to weaken its hold and break the link. Make that shift, make that adjustment between, well, literally at this link. If you were going to cut this chain, this is the one we need to really, and I've spoken about this in probably every one of my talks without actually applying it to this list, because it is how we end suffering. And what is it? It is craving. I'm going to translate it as and call it craving. Tanha. And tanha is also, I describe it as unwholesome desire. It's like thirst. It's an agitating desire. It's aggressive in its nature, in that it comes upon you and you heat up and have no control other than to go out and grab and get it. So what happens is you see something and the light, it looks nice, you feel good about it, and then what happens? Through your mind's experience of previous experiences with that which it is seeing as being a nice experience, it remembers that nice feeling, that nice sensation, that nice experience, and says, yes, I want more of that, and craving is there, wanting that thing. As I say, it's aggressive, it takes over. And you don't have to be an addict to understand this. It's like any thirst. You feel you need it. Really, it's just you want it. You feel you need to have a nice cold beer or a nice Coca-Cola. But water will satisfy the thirst just as well, more effectively, in fact. But no, we go and spend money, we go to the shops, we get nice flavoured cold drinks. What to do? To then create a better feeling that then turns into the next link, which is clinging, upadana. Upadana is the Pali word, clinging. And what is clinging? It's attachment. It's attachment to that flavour of the Coke or the cold beer. It's attachment to that good feeling, that pleasant feeling. So sometimes when we're just generally walking around, we feel a little bit down, a little bit depressed, a little bit sad, a little bit miserable. And we think of the past, not far back or a long way back, and we compare how we feel now to how we felt then. And that makes us even more miserable. We may put some music on to remind us of that time and feel quite sad, even more so. Because you're comparing feelings. You're fueling. Upadana means fuel in the literal translation, a fuel to a fire. And you're fueling that craving by clinging. Clinging to the past, or even clinging to imaginations or ideas about how it's going to be in the future. Clinging to either what you have got now, that you're enjoying, or what you hope to have, clinging to hope. Or clinging even to negative things, clinging to the feeling of loss, of detriment, of trauma from the past. Because clinging is the opposite of letting go. And this whole practice, this whole list, can be summed up by to know and let go. When you know this, it's easier to make that shift and let go. Now, throughout all of the talks I've given here on this in this format, it's always been with a view to becoming free from suffering in this lifetime. And that is through the eradication of greed, hatred and delusion, the three root defilements. Avijja you could call delusion also, is like ignorance. And how do we do that? By understanding, by knowing that there is suffering, knowing there's a cause of suffering, and the cause of suffering is this tanha, desire. The end of suffering is the letting go of that clinging, upadana, and therefore not going into the next link. And the next link is bhava, becoming. So you become this existence, you exist on this craving and this clinging. It's a little bit hard to explain, so I'll move on to the next link, which is jati, and that means birth or rebirth, but even birth in the next moment, which comes from clinging and bhava, development of bhava, so becoming, into wanting this next thing. So let's take an example. You earn some money. You do something and you're paid some money, a good amount of money, and you feel good. So you do it again and you get paid more and you feel very good. And this starts to develop a clinging to that feeling. And then you begin to, as a result of feeling good, become attached. So the clinging is there, the upadana, and you've developed this tanha, this thirst for more. But the more we get of something, the more we need to satisfy that same, to develop that same feeling, to satisfy that craving, which, as I've spoken about before, is ultimately insatiable, unsatisfiable, because all things are impermanent, suffering, and out of our control. But nevertheless, our avijja, ignorance, makes us continue with this activity into bhava, into becoming the person who works to get a lot of money to become the rich man, the rich person, as a result of seemingly a wholesomely good idea. But through the development of tanha, craving, and upadana, attachment, clinging, has become reborn as the rich man. And what does this mean? Does it mean you live happily ever after? Not necessarily true, no, because then what comes next? Jara marana. So marana, you've heard me say before, marananusati is death. And jara, exactly what it means, I'm not sure, but marana is the Pali word that sums up aging, sickness and death. In fact, they don't usually say aging, sickness and death in this list. They usually say aging, sorrow, grief, lamentation, despair and death. Now, of course, it doesn't matter how much money this rich man's got, he's become the rich man, he's still going to get old, he's going to get sick, and he's going to die. Can he take his money with him? No. All of that work and effort was a waste of time. Did he become content? No. He was forever chasing around this hamster wheel of samsara life, getting nowhere, on a treadmill, getting nowhere, for more and more and more, satisfying insatiable cravings. And what does that mean? It means he's not got an understanding of anicca, dukkha and anatta. It is ignorance. It is delusion. So all of his activity is just fueling, adding to greed. And therefore, when you don't get what you want, hatred, greed, hatred, and ignorance, delusion, those three root defilements, which are the cause of rebirth, or the cause of suffering, within this lifetime and into the next. So at that point, at Jaramarana, aging, sickness and death, we go back to the first, avijja, ignorance. And then sankhara, vijnana, namarupa, salayana, passa, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati, jara, marana. Or, in English, ignorance leads to mental formation, leading to consciousness of body and mind, the five khandhas, through the six senses: contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, and then birth and rebirth into aging, sickness and death. Birth is the cause, birth is the condition for aging, sickness and death. All we do in the meantime is try to ignore that through distraction, through gratification of those six sense bases: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. And very often through this powerful thinking, fueling craving. So how do we just literally break this chain? You have to experience and know the truth. Just knowing is not enough. You can say, right, I'm not going to have this next cigarette or this next drink. Or you could say, well, I don't want to be reborn and have this life again. But looking more immediately in the present, I don't want this, I want this next drink, I want this next cigarette. I have a craving for it. Immediately recognize that as tanha, as craving. And why is craving arising? And this is why the list is chanted the other way round, because it is in fact in this depiction, I'm more used to the chanting version, it doesn't flow so well. So, why? I see I'm now going backwards in the list, if you like. So why do you want, why is there craving? Because you are clinging to previous feelings that were good. But where are those feelings now, in this present moment? They were in the past. Did you recognize in the past, at that time, the feeling as good as you're seeing it now? Because this is where memory truly deceives us. We remember everything better than it really was. So next time you're sitting and you're comparing your situation to a past event as not being as good as, and wishing, oh, I wish I was back there doing that, try and remember all of the enormously and overabundant and overwhelming other factors that were involved, and not just what you've isolated as a point whereby you really enjoyed something. For example, one of my serious cravings I developed in India was like food, because we know we only eat once a day. So what do we have? Sweet and salt. So I knew, I experimented with this, I knew exactly what I was doing because I was experimenting with it. So the most sweet thing you can get, and it also contains a huge amount of caffeine, is a drink called Mountain Dew. There's a video even on here, a picture of this stuff, in a bright fluorescent green bottle, just to show you how unhealthy this stuff is. But it's beautiful and it's so sweet, and it's full of caffeine, and it's cold. It's one of the rare drinks you can get cold in India, and usually only at bus stands, in a 500 ml bottle, and that's rare too, because they only have tiny little drinks most places in India. Cold, fizzy, sweet, full of caffeine, and that with a packet of chips we call crisps, potato chips, very salty and some spices in there. We can't eat after afternoon, but if it's in the morning and I'm at a bus stand, I used to love being at the bus stand. Now the bus stand, I have to say, is not the best place in the world to be in India. It's the most loud, chaotic, very hectic place for a practitioner of Buddhist meditation and samadhi. A good place to put it all to the test. To sit in samadhi, and in the middle of the night, in the early hours of the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning, in some of these bus stands, it's just as noisy and hustling and bustling, but the little shops, the stands that sell the Mountain Dew and the chips are not open. So then you've only got samadhi. And there where you can draw the comparison. But at 7 o'clock in the morning, when you arrive at a bus stand, or 5 o'clock in the morning, it's still dark and that shop's open. You could just have a chai, but no, me, cold Mountain Dew and salty chips, sweet and salt. And what do I remember now? This was now some long time ago since I was last experiencing that. Oh, I love that bus stand. The majestic bus stand in Bangalore. Oh, such a lovely bus stand. Is it? No. It's the busiest, most hectic place on the planet. Thousands and thousands of people coming and going, and very, very busy place. But what do I love? I love that feeling of that cold Mountain Dew and those salty chips in the morning when you're so hungry before it's time to get your first meal and your one meal. So this is how obvious it is. And the same can be applied to a cigarette or a drink. But you remember a holistic experience of life as being a better place through the one little aspect of it, and forget all the rest that it was attached to. So now I think, well, I'd like a Mountain Dew and I'd like a packet of salty crisps, but do I want to go and spend 3 hours waiting for a bus in Majestic bus station or another bus stand somewhere else? No, I can do without that. I'll drink some water, that'll satisfy my thirst. But I have doubt about that. I think, no, it's never going to be as good. But as soon as I drink the water, I have a bottle of this just water here. We have bottled water for drinking here. It's a Thai thing. I won't go into that conversation. Anyway, drink the water, lots and lots of water, and then you're not thirsty anymore. And very quickly, this need for the Mountain Dew dissipates. And if you drink enough water, you're not so hungry either. So that need for the salt, satisfying the salty craving, dissipates. Even if it just a little bit goes away. And for me, it goes away completely. I can actually just think about it and it goes away completely. And think about it, I can make it come back again. But that's because I'm using these teachings of the Buddha in that particular experience, and I'm putting it to the test with those particular items that I used to and would still, if given the opportunity, enjoy to this day. And there's an example. Apply it in your own lives to things. You remember a wonderful holiday you had. What was it about the holiday you remember? Was it a particular restaurant you went to and ate every night? A particular member of staff in the hotel who looked after you particularly well? Was it a particular experience, a visit, a swimming? Or was it the whole thing? Generally, you can isolate it down to just a couple of components that you've clung to, attached to, and through bhava, through becoming, are wanting to continuously recreate. This is the 12 links of dependent origination. This isn't handing over your addiction, your craving to a higher power. It isn't saying you are powerless over your addiction, your craving, and to suffer and continue to call yourself an alcoholic or a drug addict for the rest of your life because you are just recovering. Because when you stop, you have stopped. You're not an alcoholic anymore or a drug addict until you have another drink or take some drugs, and then you are that again, you have become. But when you stop, that is past, it's gone. Now this might be controversial what I'm saying, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm speaking from experience. When you have finished, it's gone. It's the past. If you dwell on it and remember it, oh, I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm not saying that flippantly. No, you were an alcoholic. Now you are a sober person. You are just sober. That's it. You're not recovering from anything. Your body is repaired. The liver heals very quickly. You can go from a liver that's about to just flake out and you're about to die to 100% liver function in a few years. It doesn't take long. And you can give up alcohol for the rest of your life. I haven't had one alcoholic drink for, I don't know, 15, getting on for 15 years or something. There are no cravings. There are no... And I used to, in the line of work I was in, from early teens I used to drink a lot, and through my career it was all part of the 80s and the 90s. It's what we did. Even the police, you know, in the old programs you've seen with the whiskey and the filing cabinet and the Sweeney and this and that and the other, it was the world. We used to drive around drunk and everything. It was the way it was. Not good at all. But that was the way it was then. But am I recovering from that? No. That was a long time ago. It's over. It was probably bad things maybe you did then. I did then. We'll create karma vipaka. Pachaya, another Pali word, is causes, and which creates these conditions. So, karma vipaka, karma, things we do of actions of body, speech and mind, are going to have their toll. And the obvious and immediate toll, karma vipaka, through drinking too much or taking drugs or smoking, is health problems, both physical and mental health problems. So you can see it very clearly. Associate that good feeling, that clinging to the good feeling as a result of craving, and therefore the becoming, associate it to the bad feeling as a result of those actions of trying to, of firstly, yes, satisfying that craving, but where does it go? To more and more until it is unsatisfiable. And those of you experiencing this, or have experienced that, know exactly what I'm talking about. So we look at this chain and we break that link. Tanha, craving. How? Seeing it for what it is. It too is impermanent. It too will arise and pass away. If you have a craving, it won't stay there forever. Even in sitting in meditation, I want to move, my leg hurts and my leg hurts. Stop thinking about it, think about the other leg, or what it feels like behind your left ear. How do the back of your hands feel? Move the thought away from that leg, and soon the craving to move will go. What happens if you do move? You act, you become. Then very shortly afterwards, you want to move again. Why? Because you felt satisfying. You felt some gratification when you did move into a slightly different position from uncomfortable to comfortable. But very quickly you've become uncomfortable again. Did you learn from that experience? No, because you then move again. Before you know it, you're dancing around in your meditation, moving here and moving there. But if you just sit with it, sit through it, as long as you're not doing damage, of course, it will pass. It will arise, it will stay a while, and it will pass away. This is anicca, impermanence. And yes, dukkha, unsatisfactory, suffering. But we learn from this suffering that all things are that. All conditioned things are impermanent and suffering and out of our control. I'm sure I've spoken for way too long. When I say this, it's because it takes a very long time for these videos to upload, and I like to try and get them to upload overnight. So I will cut it there. And I hope there's something useful in this talk, and if there is, please use it to your own benefit, and if you can, share it with others and hopefully help them too. So I wish you all the very best in your meditation and your lives with all that you are doing, and may your practice be fruitful, enjoyable, and ultimately lead you on this path happily towards Nibbana. Thank you for watching.